Hello, Brain Allies. You're listening to Brains Out Loud, where we talk about important topics surrounding mental health, from our work life to our personal life and everywhere in between. Our goal is that through these conversations, we can help break the stigma surrounding mental health and encourage our listeners to prioritize mental health on equivalent level to physical health. Today, we are here with Robbie Teasdale, a ceramic studio artist and volunteer firefighter who lives with his wife and two rescue dogs in Richmond, Kentucky. Robbie is a 2021 South Arts Emerging Traditional Artist Grant recipient. He makes traditional wheel-thrown pottery as well as sculptural forms that explore his experience with bipolar disorder. Robbie, thank you so much for being here with us today. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation because you have had such an interesting life and you're such a resilient person. So I'm honored to have you on today. So you grew up in Kenya and lived there until you were 18. What was it like growing up there?
I get that question all the time, and I still don't know how to answer it that well. It's just such a completely different life. I grew up having a lot of responsibility as a kid, and also I feel like you grow up fast because you see a lot of hard things, uh, things that in America are cleaned up really fast, like death, and uh, a lot of our suffering is out of sight. And where I grew up, you see it every day. So um, it was exciting. It was fun. I wouldn't trade my childhood for another one.
Okay. So that sounds challenging though. How did experiencing those unusual circumstances, or I guess unusual to American society, seeing death right in front of you, seeing suffering in a more present form, how did that impact your mental health and well-being?
Well, for me growing up, seeing that stuff was all I knew. It was just normal, and my family was there to help the community, and we did what we could. I was involved in helping my community too. But I do have a sensitive heart, and uh, it definitely had an effect on me for sure.
And one of the reasons I invited you to come on today was because you have a really inspiring mental health journey and your willingness to share it with our listeners. So, can you take me back to where your mental health journey began and how it kind of started to evolve over time?
Yeah. So the onset of my bipolar disorder happened immediately following finding my sister who had just taken her life. And within a week, I was in full-blown mania. And I had just gotten married as well. We were going on our honeymoon trip to Norway. And during that time in Norway, I was completely manic, and I ran away. I actually left the place where we were staying and ran 10 miles in the middle of the night to another city. I had the severe paranoia that people were after me, and it was really tough. And then it wasn't until we got back to the States and we got back to Berea College, where we had just begun our undergrad, that the pendulum swung the other way down into severe depression. And I was actually holding a loaded gun to my head and with the finger on the trigger. And I had just experienced the loss of my sister. My family had just experienced the loss of my sister. And what really got me to get help was just not wanting to put everybody through that same thing again. It was just, is so awful that I was just like, I have to figure this out, and I can't kill myself. So I put the gun away and I went to the emergency room and I said, no, I'm going to kill myself if you let me out of here. So of course they locked me down.
Right.
So that was the beginning of my real mental health journey.
That's an extremely brave thing to do, to take yourself to the hospital and to be so vulnerable about the place that you're in. For our listeners who can't relate to that experience, how would you describe the feeling of being suicidal?
It's a loop and it never goes away. So you have the same like two or three thoughts. At least I do. I can only tell how I felt about it, but I would get into this loop pattern of just feeling like nothing is going to change. I have to get out of here. I have to kill myself. And then the third thought that I would repeatedly go through is just how I was going to kill myself. And I would picture it in my mind, and it would just loop over and over and over. It's just awful. And I have so much empathy when people tell me, I'm in a bad place and I'm contemplating suicide, because it, it is, you just get stuck there, and you don't think anything's ever going to be different.
Yeah, it's a horrible, horrible place to be. I've definitely found myself there as well in the deep depths of my depression. And it really feels like there's no other way out. It feels like there's no other solution. So to be as resilient as you have been to get help, it's so much more challenging than anyone could possibly imagine when you're in that state. It's hard to get out of bed in the morning. It's hard to take a shower. It's hard to think any organic thoughts outside of the depths of the darkness that you're in. Who did you have to lean on during that time? Was your wife supportive during that time, and did you rely on her, or how was your family involved? What did your relationships look like when you were going through that?
Yeah, tremendous support from my family and from my wife. And I put them all through so much. Uh, and just the fact that they're still around for me is powerful. And it's taken me some period of stability uh, to contemplate that and realize that just how much I put them through. Because when you're unwell, when you're depressed, so much of my thinking was just revolved around me and my problems and what I was going through. And no concern whatsoever what everybody else around me who loved me and was experiencing the effects of this with me was going through. So they've definitely been there for me. And my wife told me, because not too long ago I was talking to her and I said I really don't know how I got out of that time we were just talking about, when I was the first depression, when I was very close to killing myself. And she said that she came back from class every day back to our apartment, and she was afraid to open the door because she thought I would be dead. So that's how bad it was.
So, right. Yeah, it's hard because you're in such a dark place and you're focusing on your way out and the solution for yourself. And then at the same time, you're contemplating how your decision is going to impact the people that are the closest to you and that you love the most. So I always give so much props to the families and the friends of people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, who are suicidal and actively attempting or contemplating. I'm just really thankful for the people that were able to help me, come out of the dark place that I was in when I was in, the depths of my depression, because it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of worrying and it's a lot of concern that surrounds you. And as a person who's actively suicidal, that's kind of hard to focus on. It's kind of hard to focus on everyone else because you're kind of just, at least in my experience, I was trying to be sensitive of others, but I was also so self-involved because I was just not sure how I could focus on anybody else when I needed to escape the place that I was in.
Yeah, yeah, it's tough.
So you got to a point in your life where you struggled with multiple overdoses. Were those overdoses involuntary? Were they intentional? And what was going through your mind before you ended up in those situations?
Well, they were all prescribed medications. Uh, the first time I did it, it was actually Ambien. I was having terrible insomnia, and I took the entire month's prescription of Ambien. So, like, 30 pills. I don't know. It was a lot. And the scary part about it was my wife was actually away on a trip, so I was alone. And uh, I just had the thought of uh, if I die, whatever. It was kind of like a half-hearted suicide attempt. Like, maybe I won't die, but hopefully I will, kind of thing. And so immediately after I took all the pills, I had a moment of like, what have I done? And so I called a friend who I knew has had experience with this type of thing. And he immediately came to the apartment and sat with me and was just kind of monitoring. And really, he should have taken me to the hospital, but he didn't. Um, but yeah, I ended up surviving. I threw up a lot, passed out a few times. And then the other overdoses was trying to feel something. Like, I just felt so emotionally numb that I just wanted to feel something else. And uh, I took a bunch of antidepressants, and I ended up being hospitalized. The cops showed up and they were like, "You're not in trouble, but we need to get you safely to the hospital." And then I was in the ICU for a while. And so, yeah, I would say they were just kind of weak suicide attempts. I know how to die if I was seriously wanted to die, but I was also very okay with the fact that if I died, that's that's fine.
Did you feel like part of it was a cry for help at all? Or do you feel like it was really just being indifferent in terms of where you stood in life?
I don't. I've heard that a lot. That people have, do that for a cry for help. It didn't feel like that's where it was coming from for me, um, because everybody in my life knew it was serious. We had just lost my sister Julie, so there was no like, is Robbie really in a bad place? Everybody knew. And I do want to say I just saw a TikTok video uh, either this morning or last night, and dude said, allow yourself 5 minutes of negativity and then move on. So 5 minutes to cry, be angry, yell, whatever, and then just try to let it go. And so I'm
Wow.
excited for this conversation to move into like ice baths and
Yes,
happier stuff. I feel like it's been very dark so far.
I know. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable and honest in
Yeah.
terms of sharing those experiences. But again, one of the reasons I brought you on is because you're so resilient. And I would love to hear about when did your recovery start and when did you start utilizing self-help and the ice baths that you do? Can you tell our audience a little bit about some of your coping strategies and where that began?
Well, Julia, I don't feel resilient at all. Let me just say that first. I feel very uh, sometimes, especially when I talk about things with people, I don't feel resilient or strong at all. I feel very weak and kind of walking a tightrope. But recovery, when did it begin? That was the main question you just asked.
Yeah.
I would say it began when I became consciously interested in getting better. So being curious about my health and being curious about ways that would help me get better, and then learning that there are other ways besides just taking the prescribed medications that can help with my stability. So I've tried things that didn't work, that I researched and found, and they didn't work for me. Maybe they worked for somebody else. And when I discovered ice bathing, it was such an immediate switch and just dramatically changed my mood and my sleep. And I just felt alive and excited again. And a couple of years ago, I was put on an antipsychotic injectable, so it's a once a month injection, and it was awful for me. Like I, I had no feeling whatsoever, and also just very low intelligence. I felt like it really affected my intelligence. I would just sit on the couch all day and consume just trash entertainment, like mindless garbage, stupid stuff. And I gained 50 pounds in that time too, very short period. My primary care doctor took my blood work and I was pre-diabetic, super high triglycerides. He put me on cholesterol medications. And I went to my psychiatrist and I said, my goal is to be on as little medication as possible. And this one really isn't working for me. And I need to taper off this one as soon as possible. And I'm lucky to have found a psychiatrist that really listens and works with me in my interest and understands that I know me better than anybody. So if I tell her like this is happening and it's not working for me, she listens and she helps me like find other solutions. So that was a big part of it. Just realizing that medications weren't the only answer and sometimes maybe aren't the best answer for me.
Okay. Yeah, medications are definitely a challenge because there's so many out there and each of our bodies are so unique. And so I'm on a couple different medications that I'm very grateful for, but it was a long, long process of finding the medications that worked for me. And it can be a totally painful process. So, it's saddening to me or that you don't feel resilient because when you talk about everything that you've been through, you know, most likely, you have a genetic predisposition to bipolar and to depression and mania. And when your sister passed, this triggered your experience with mental illness, but that was completely out of your control, both the incident and your genetic predisposition. And so when you think about the odds that you were up against to come now to a place where not only have you been in a place of recovery, but also that you can come on a podcast and talk about it openly. I mean, that's huge. That's something that, I sit here and I ask you a bunch of questions, but it's funny if the tables were turned, like I question my own ability to be able to get through a podcast and to be able to talk about the darkest depths of my history. So I really appreciate what you're sharing, and it's okay if you don't feel resilient, but the more you share, the more resilient you seem to me. So I just want you to know that, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to agree with that as well.
That's very kind. And have you heard the podcast Dynamic Healing? It's
No, I haven't.
okay. He's the guy who hosts it. Well, there's two hosts. One of them was a spinal surgeon for 32 years and focused on like solving pain problems. And the other one is a professor of like psychological pain and works with the hospital dealing with patients. So they're both like pain experts, but they do both mental and physical pain. And what you just said about all the stuff happening that was not in my control at all, they talk about in their episode something about monkey brain. I don't remember exactly the title of the episode, but they said we have no control over the threats that show up in our life, but we do have some control in how we show up to those threats and how we respond to those threats, and the physiology of the threat response in a nervous system that's hyperactive, kind of in fight or flight all the time, is what causes these imbalances and these disorders a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think that it's a learning process. Like there's, in my experience, it was a huge learning curve when I started to really experience mental illness and really start having severe symptoms. And it took me so long to recognize the combination of things that I needed to do to keep myself in a healthy state of well-being. And so, yes, there are ways that we can control the way that we respond to certain triggers, to certain incidents, and thank goodness that we have that ability. But the reality is it takes a lot of time to get there. So I'm always telling people when they're feeling stuck, when they're feeling behind, where they're feeling like I'm never going to get out of this, like there is going to be a recovery point, but you have to put in so much work to get there. And that's not something that you can ever pretend is not the case.
Yeah, it is. It takes work for sure. It takes a lot of work. Yeah.
So you are an amazing artist and you have made some beautiful pottery that I've seen on, and sculptures that I've seen on your TikTok, which you have a pretty great following. People love your TikTok content. How has art played a role in your recovery?
Oh, huge. I mean, all the pain and trauma is the reason I'm an artist. It's the reason I think most artists are artists. It's not what we choose to do because it's going to make us super successful and wealthy. We do it because we have to for ourselves. I feel like, at least for me and all the artist friends that I have, there's no other way for them. They have to be creating. It is therapy for sure.
How did you get into art and sculpture and pottery?
I took some pottery classes at boarding school in Kenya and fell in love with the clay. But that was not my original plan. I really had strong plans to go into the military and was on a waiting list to go to West Point. They said if you wait a year, you'll be moved up on the waiting list and you'll probably get in. And I didn't want to wait, so I chose the RTC scholarship and started in that program and found myself very unhappy with it, and at least the community that I was a part of there for that short time just didn't sit right with me. So then I started pursuing other things. I went to school for nursing for a little bit, and I was actually in school when all this stuff went down with my sister. And I kept taking leave of absence after leave of absence. I would get through half a semester. It would get to the point where you can decide to withdraw, or it's going to be on your record, all these failing classes. So then I'd withdraw from the semester. And the school was super understanding and super kind to keep letting me back in, to keep trying again. And really, if I could do it over, I would have left college for a few years to get some stability and get my happiness and energy back. But that's not what happened. I kept trying, and I was taking some very hard classes, and it just wasn't working out. But the school, Berea College, has a ceramic apprenticeship program where you work for the school making ceramics, and they sell them, and they do a lot of work study programs at Berea College. It's free tuition, but you have to have a job somewhere in the school. And so I was involved in the clay even during that time, and made some connections with some other ceramic artists and communities outside of the school that I then transitioned into.
Okay, that's so
Yeah.
interesting. Well, what a beautiful path to get you where you are. I mean, so many ups and downs and highs and lows, but now you found something that gives you the opportunity to express yourself and create beauty. And it's also a healing process. And that's really amazing. I want to go, I mentioned your TikTok and you do a lot of sculpture work on there and pottery displays on there. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about the ice bath? So I know that's something that you found, you discovered, but how does it work? And I've seen you in a video go 3 minutes under a body of water, which freezing cold water, which I don't know how you do. So can you explain like what it does for your body and your mental health and why you do it?
Yeah, I can say what it does for me. I actually read an article on New York Times this morning, just kind of like poking around at things, trying to educate myself before I came on here. I know that's really silly. It's impossible to do right before, but the New York Times article was actually very negative, and they said there's little to no research that this benefits your mental health. There's anecdotal evidence, but it's also can be very dangerous for your heart and this and that. And then they talk about Wim Hof on there, who's a huge advocate of ice plunging and meditative breathing. He has his own method and everything. So they specifically mention him too. And the conclusion of the article was there needs to be more research into it. And I hear that a lot with a lot of holistic things that have helped me. When I look into it, into the science, they say there needs to be more research. But like Russell Brand said, the science follows the money. And there's no money to be made if we can get well on our own. You know, the healthier we are, the less we need all the stuff they sell towards our health. But I will say, for me, I have no doubt that it's helped me because I had just horrible, as my psychiatrist said, Robbie was unremittent bipolar for 5 years, meaning he would just go from periods of serious depression, 3 to 6 months at a time, and then not a very long period of stability, maybe a few weeks to a month, and then he'd be up in mania, and then back down in depression. And I did that for years. And during that time, I was just adding it up in my head. I took thousands of antidepressants and antipsychotics, thousands in 5 years, a lot of pills, but I wasn't getting better. And I take a mood stabilizer, Lamictal, which I liked because the side effects are very low and it seems to do well for me. I would like to continue tapering down and just seeing how I do and monitoring it carefully. But what the ice does for me, it's like a complete reset. So if I'm having insomnia for more than a few days, then I'll go get the ice. I'll get in the ice and I'll sleep 10 hours that night through the night, which I've had insomnia so bad in the past. It gets so frustrating. I'm sure you've experienced insomnia probably
Oh
too.
my God.
Yeah.
Insomnia has ruined my periods of my life, has really made periods of my life quite challenging.
Yeah. And we know that sleep is critical for mental health. There's no doubt. Any psychiatrist will tell you you have to get your sleep. So that's one major way that it's helped in just the mental discipline of getting yourself to getting to the ice is really helpful too. Just to develop that willpower of this really sucks, but I'm gonna get myself to do it because I know it's gonna help me. All the physiological benefits, I don't know the science of, but I can feel it in my body, feel happier and more energetic after I do it. And the pain, the initial shock of getting in only lasts like a minute or two. If you breathe and you don't like tense up and resist it, just breathe and relax, and it becomes quite blissful. And people claim that it releases a ton of happy chemicals in your brain. I know it does because I feel it every time I do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's such a tool for wellness. Like athletes do it to help their bodies recover, and it's also can be a tool to help your mind recover. So I it's fascinating to me that there's not more science behind it, but like you said, science follows money, and it just depends on what people are willing to donate towards and research into, and so it's very interesting. But that's why we kind of have to give ourselves the opportunity to find what works for us and test and trial and error, because eventually we'll find our thing. For me, it's meditating in the shower. I meditate in the shower every single morning before I start my day. I do affirmations every single morning before I start my day. The weirdest thing, I can't get myself to really meditate anywhere else. Like I have to be in the shower, and that's just what it is for me. So it's like trial and error, finding your thing, finding what works for you. But last time we spoke, you shared an amazing story with me about a very special man that you met and how he impacted your life. If you know what I'm talking about, would you be willing to share that story with our listeners?
Oh, absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I was with him this past weekend. We went and visited this sculpture park in Frankfort, capital of Kentucky. It's called Josephine Sculpture Park. And he had been there before, and he posted pictures online. And I said in the comments, I said, I'm going. This is too cool. I've got to go. But then I just kind of forgot about it for like a year. And then I saw him recently, and he has such a great memory that when I asked him about it, I said, "Where was that sculpture park that you posted about a while ago?" And he just laughed. He said, "You didn't go." He said, "You commented on that you were going that day or something." I was like, "Yeah, I never ended up going." And so he was like, "Well, let's go. Let's go soon." And I said, "Oh, how about Saturday?" He said, "All right, let's go." So how I met him was during my last full-blown manic episode in 2017, and it was so bad it went into psychotic territory for a long time, and I was a danger to myself and others. I mean, I hate even saying that because you sound so, it doesn't feel good to label yourself or be labeled that, but it's just a fact that I have to accept. So I was in the hospital in Lexington, and he is a crisis intervention teacher for mental health. He teaches the people in the hospital how to respond, and he's also one of the ones that is there to respond to the crisis. So he was charged with watching after me. I was in my own room, but he would just be sitting there with me all night long, every night. And I felt so much better when he was there. I mean, the paranoia was severe, and certain people, certain personalities would be super triggering to me. But he was just super calming and just had a great presence. So fast forward 4 years later, I'm at an art and music festival selling my pottery, and he comes through my booth, but I didn't know who he was. But I told my wife, I said, I really felt like I know that guy. And not just that I recognize him, but like I just felt this heart connection. Like, this is a really good dude. And I just felt like I know him from somewhere. It's like when some people talk about like past life relationships. It was like, I was like that sort of thing. Like, man, I feel like we're connected. Anyway, he went through my booth. I asked for his name. I got his name because he was organizing an art festival in Lexington the next year, and he said, "I want you to come to this festival." And I said, "Okay." I'll check it out. And so when I got home, I got on Facebook, I got online, I did my uh, Googling around with his name and things, trying to find out where this guy might have crossed paths with. And he came up at that hospital as a crisis and addiction counselor and crisis intervention teacher, and it immediately clicked. I was like, I know who he is now. So then I went to his art music festival that he organized. He started a nonprofit called Altruism, which is to support and promote artists, and he's really interested in helping artists be successful, and also just promoting wellness of artists' mental health in general. He's just a really sweet guy. So.
That's amazing. And didn't you run into someone else at that festival that you had a connection with as well?
No, I had not just one, but two huge connections. He was one of the other featured artists there, and I got to talking to him, and he was a Kenyan, and so we got to speak Swahili together, which is our native tongue from back home, and we had a super good time. We were actually in the same area of the festival, just really close to each other. So we hung out in each other's spaces a lot during that weekend. And I got to talking to him, and I said, how did you meet Adam, who's the guy from the hospital? And he said, oh, it was a funny story. He said, actually, I was hospitalized there, and he was my sitter. And I said, that's exactly how I met him first. It was crazy.
That is just the craziest story.
Yeah.
I mean, what a powerful universe it is to have you all together.
And just how much time had passed between our experiences, like completely different years in the hospital. Many years had passed since I had met him in that state. And what an incredible guy. He's really good at connecting with people and calming them down. He's really good at his job because he de-escalates the energy and the mania and the psychosis to a level where it's safe again without like going hands-on. I've had some just awful and I would say traumatic experiences with being restrained. And I talked to him about it. I said, how often have you had to go hands-on with people? And he said, in all my many years of work doing this job, he said, like twice. He said, there's other people who I work with or I've seen do this work that go hands-on all the time. And I encourage them to not be in that line of work because it's just not right.
Wow. So he has a very special perspective to the work he does and a special approach. And clearly it's made a lifelong impact on you and on others. And it's just so crazy that you were able to connect again. So I just adore that story. The one last thing I want to ask you about today is that you're a volunteer firefighter. And I have so much respect for volunteer firefighters. My dad's a volunteer firefighter. And I was wondering, how did you get into that? And how long have you been doing it? And also, being a volunteer firefighter, you see a lot of scary and could be considered somewhat triggering situations. So how have you navigated your experience as a volunteer firefighter to kind of protect your mental well-being while on the job?
That's the firefighting is very recent for me. I joined the department in April, so I haven't seen the potentially triggering situations yet. All the calls I've gone to have not been, hard to see too much. But I will say, I feel, use that term resilient. I feel more resilient to those situations than I ever have in my life because I know I have tools now. Like you said, it takes a long time to learn what works for you, and there's no telling what could happen in my life, whether firefighting or just anywhere along my path that could be severely triggering. And I'm not naive to think that I'm never going to be manic again or never going to be suicidally depressed again. But I do feel like I have a much better chance at surviving it again than I used to. You know.
That's amazing. Yeah, once you have tools, it's amazing what you can endure and accomplish. I think even it just in my own experiences, situations that prior to them happening, the idea of them happening were like world crashing, the worst case scenario that I could ever imagine. And then when they actually did happen, I was okay. Like, you know, whether it be a breakup in a relationship or a situation with work that's upsetting or really difficult, I feel that now I have these strategies and these self-care practices that I can utilize. And so it just really goes to show how powerful recovery can be in the process and the learning process of what works and what doesn't for you. So I'm just always encouraging people to try their best to keep going and to find what works for them. So thank you so much for being here today. This has been amazing. I knew this was going to be such a great episode for our listeners. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we end today?
Just one thing, just to encourage anybody who's in it right now, please hang on. I think the biggest healer for me has just been time. So, like you said, just learning those things that help. And for me, what's probably one of the biggest tools I've developed is just an awareness of how things affect me. So if I'm going up, I know things I can do that kind of taper that energy back down. And when I'm down, seek out and go do those things that bring me back up, and do them before they get to a place where you lose control, to where you don't have that capacity anymore. Because one thing that really doesn't help is telling someone who's really depressed or really manic what they need to do, because it just doesn't help. In fact, when it happens to me, it probably has the opposite effect. Like, you just need to take your meds and you'll be better, or you just need to go work out and get outside or do this or that. That doesn't help at all. So once you have stability, keep that awareness, watch out for the ups and downs, and try to keep it between the ditches.
That's really, really powerful advice. And I appreciate you for sharing that. And where can our listeners continue to see your work? And, you know, what's your TikTok handle? Do you have an Instagram? Do you have a website? How can people find you and continue to follow your journey and your artistic journey?
Oh, well, the true secret to mental health and happiness is to support local artists. So seek out your local studio potters and painters and musicians, and show up and support them, because we need it. It's a little boost of dopamine and serotonin every time we make a connection with someone, or someone loves a piece that we made. You can find me on Instagram and Pax Pottery, PAXPOTTERY, just one word, and Breaking Rob with 2 B's at the end on TikTok.
Amazing.
And I also have an Etsy shop, since you asked. It's also Pax Pottery. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Robbie, for being here today. This is Robbie Teasdale with Brains Out Loud, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Julia.